welcome everyone to our first ever Care Corner. And thank you to Mother Honestly for hosting us. As was mentioned, this is brought to you on behalf of the Care Force. We're a kind of an organic group that sprung up mid last year in the midst of COVID and a lot of us working in the space, but in our own silos, coming together to say, is there more that we could be working on if we work together? So we're a group of founders like myself, funders, policymakers, advocates, storytellers. And today, we're going to hear just a little bit about the big ambitious ideas that each of us has in how are we transforming, how are we building futures that we all want to live in. Progress is a lot about experimenting and trying things out and getting it all out there. So today what we're going to be doing is kind of a lightning round. 90 seconds. We have 7 amazing people from across all sorts of different experience sets. They're going to share with us their one big idea and what they think is a part of a future that we all want to live in. Each person has about 1.5 minutes to share their ideas. Then at the end, we'd love for each of you to start thinking about, let's think big and bold. Think of the future that you want to live in. What's a big idea that you would want to see? Put it in the chat. And if you have any questions. So with that, I'd love to get started. Patrice Martin is the co-founder and CEO of The Holding Co. and a dear friend and collaborator. I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Avni. Hi, everyone. I'm Patrice. It is such a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My big idea is really, what if we could design schools to actually fit working families like a glove? This is not a new idea, but it does feel like a big and a bold one that we could get to. Schools really designed on this outdated paradigm that we're all living through, that someone's at home to take care of everything. And this is just increasingly not the case in this country. And so what if we actually designed schools to be a place where kids were educated, but also cared for, and not just children, but also families? Think about starting with just the timing of school, like this dreaded gap at the end of the day, like that could absolutely be eliminated. We do not need to be wrestling with this insanity of summer. And how do we fill that space and time? Like, what if we could just bring kids to school and all of their needs were totally taken care of? Like, extracurricular activities were integrated. No more like running around thinking about soccer, wondering how we have budget to get kids music lessons. Like, why couldn't that actually be built in so that every kid has equal access to those opportunities? And then think about schools as a platform for like a city or a town. Like, what would it mean to integrate healthcare, mental health services, all the ways in which, flu shots, we could be thinking about what it means to support families. And I think it's exciting to think too, like, what would it mean for the private sector to pop into this platform? Like, what would it look like to have dinner, groceries, exercise classes? Like, just the way in which, if we actually designed school as a center where we see families and children's needs and be able to really holistically consider them. I mean, this shouldn't be so far off as a reality for us.
Goosebumps. Thanks, Patrice. That is an incredible way to kind of kick it off. Next up, we have Brian Anderson, the Executive Director and Co-founder at Fathering Together. Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. My big dream is that dads invest in their families just like they do in their careers. Many dads that I talk with at Fathering Together, myself included, we've put so much energy into building our professional identity, investing in the careers and our goals. And that's great. We want people to follow their passions. But how do we realign that and reimagine fathers to be equally invested in their families? And what that looks like for us is, how do they build those emotional connections? How do they see the relationships that they have with their partners, with their children, with ultimately their neighbors and their communities as equally important and as profitable, so to speak, as they have in the marketplace? And what we do is we work with them to navigate those skills. How do we realign the skills? How do we rethink that team leader training that they did, the emotional intelligence workshop that they did in the office, to apply in the home and build that relationship so that the kids grow up knowing their father as a human being, not just at this quote unquote paycheck or breadwinner that only comes in for a few hours in the morning and a few hours before bedtime. And by reimagining fathers as change agents, investing in them to be caregivers, they'll see themselves and all of us as part of a solution that is relational rather than transactional, and allow all of us to build a stronger family unit that can invest in the communities at whole. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. What I love about that is that a lot of these things are about cultural change and about how do we shift kind of perception, and in the small kind of ways they make big impact. So thank you for sharing that. Next, we have Eve Rodsky, the best-selling author of Fair Play.
Hi, Avni. Thank you for having me. I'm going to use my 90 seconds to tell a story based on my moonshot, which is that we start to value an hour holding our children's hand at the pediatrician's office as much as we value an hour in the boardroom. And my 90-second story is a client. I work with high net worth families. That's my day job, around their family foundations and family businesses. And I had a client who called me in 2018 and said he was at a funeral and he thought of me. So it's great that people are thinking of me at funerals. But what he was reflecting on was another titan of business had just passed away, and he was at his funeral in a church. And it was a packed house, and his 3 daughters were all in white. And each daughter went up to the podium and started to recite a very silly Shel Silverstein type poem, Dr. Seuss type poem, without any context. And one daughter goes up to the podium, and then the next daughter goes up to the podium. And finally, the third daughter goes up to the podium to read her poem. At this point, the audience is sort of laughing and smiling, but unsure of what's happening. And then all 3 daughters leaned into the microphone and said, "These are the stories, the poems our father wrote to us as our tooth fairy growing up." And what my client reflected on was that nobody talked about this man's legacy as a titan of business. Nobody talked about the money left in his bank account. What people left from that memorial service was the idea that this man was a hidden poet, a tooth fairy for his daughters. And that's what his legacy was to that group of people. And so what I like to think about is chores and housework are not chores and housework. They are our humanity. We remember who washed the dishes with us. We remember who tucked us in at night. We remember who the person was that taught us how to ride a bike. And so I hope we start to integrate and start to center chores and housework and recognize that it's the most important work we do as a society.
Thanks, Eve. I think there's something so beautiful around the value of time and how we value things. Thanks for sharing that. Next, we've got Alana Berkowitz, a founder of the Springbed Collective.
I muted myself so that you would not hear my child. So, all staying on brand. So my moonshot was making all high performing companies places where caregiving employees can bring their whole selves to work. So, not a lot of surprise that this is top of mind this year. There were 1.2 million fewer mothers of children under the age of 18 in the workforce in August of 2021 than in August 2019. And of course, we also know that 20% of the workforce are caring for long-term ill or elderly family members. And, we will all be caregivers, and we will all be cared for at some point if we're living on this earth. And, it was reminding me, there was a founder who was telling me a story about caring for her mother who was dying of cancer, and her being afraid to tell her boss or the rest of her company that she was part of the many millions of Americans who are doing this kind of unpaid caregiving work. She thought she'd be, judged more harshly for being less focused, or having to dash out for sort of urgent medical appointments. And here she was, this absolute star performer who was forced to fear whether turning in her quarterly reports late to hold her dying mother's hand was going to penalize her, in her career. And I just always think of that story of saying, like, wow, we've really gotten this quite backwards. If someone this talented who wanted to spend this precious time in this way is feeling like her career is going to get this big setback. to me, the upside is in the middle of what people are now calling the Great Resignation, right? So we have millions of Americans who are changing jobs at incredibly high rates of folks thinking about changing jobs. We know that retaining talent is more critical than ever before. So we need this new culture and norms because we know we need to keep caregivers here. And that can mean, access to care coordination tools like Wealthy, or platforms like Urban Sitter that help you find caregivers, meal delivery. It could be, free childcare on or off site, paid for by employers. It can be mental health for all that is freely accessible for those who are dealing with the burdens of caregiving. And I guess I would just say, caregiving is a superpower, but it's just one part of us. We all have ferocious strengths and passions that are beyond our identity as caregivers. But if we can't caregive, the rest of what we're great at can't shine for our employers. And employers want the absolute best from their employees. They can't survive the competition without getting the best, and they can't get the best without ensuring caregiving employees can bring their whole selves to work. So my last thing is, according to research that we got to work on with Patrice and the Holding Co. and our friends over at Pivotal, 42% of employers plan on adding new employee care benefits this coming year. So, let's make it 100%.
I love it. And thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing such explicit examples of what that might actually look like in each of our lives as employees, as managers, as leaders. Next up, we have Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner, the CEO and founder of Moms Rising.
Thank you. My big idea is let's finally build a care infrastructure. Moms have long been an economic force fueling our economy, a healthcare force saving lives, a caregiving force lifting our families, and frankly, everyday superheroes. And now moms are disproportionately on the front lines of the pandemic. The data is in, and the pandemic is having an outsized impact on women and moms, with women of color experiencing compounded health and economic harms due to structural racism. Moms were hanging by a thread before the pandemic, and now that thread has unraveled altogether for many families, pushing moms out of much needed jobs and hurting public health. It doesn't have to be this way. Just like we need to build bridges and roads to drive on in order to go to work, we need to build a care infrastructure so parents can go to work, so children can thrive, so businesses can grow, and so care workers can earn living wages. A care infrastructure means national, universal policies, including paid family and medical leave for all when serious health crisis strikes or a new baby arrives, just like every other industrialized nation already has. Childcare for everyone, home and community-based services for people who are aging and people with disabilities, living wages and a path to citizenship for care workers, access to unbiased healthcare, and more. Moms simply can't wait. Our nation and our economy simply can't wait. Studies show our GDP will increase by 10 to 15 basis points with these policies in place. Building a care infrastructure isn't just the right thing to do, it's the economically smart thing to do. Moms are rising to make this happen, and I'm delighted to share that momentum is also growing in Congress, yes, even today. So I invite everyone to join us and our million members at momsrising.org if you haven't already, to build the care infrastructure that we all need. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. That is so beautifully said. And thank you for all that work. So before we go to the last two, if all of you have any ideas or for your big ideas or any questions that you'd like to ask of any of our incredible leaders, please start putting that into the chat so we can turn towards that after we get to our last two speakers. For our next speaker, we've got Catherine Goldstein, and she's going to be speaking about her big idea.
Make sure I am unmuted.
You're on mute. I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right. So I'm Catherine Goldstein. I'm the creator and host of the Double Shift podcast. And my moonshot is to make every problem mothers face more equally a man's problem. So let's make our problems for men who have power. So this may make you uncomfortable. This idea makes people uncomfortable because it goes against the "you got this, mama, you can have it all, you can do it all" ethos we are all force-fed as mothers, because having it all as a worldview places everything on mothers and leaves institutions unchanged. Women taking on more and more without demanding changes preserves a sexist and unequal status quo. So mothers do not hold anywhere close to our proportionate share of economic or cultural or political power. So let's target the people who do have power. Make your biggest problem a man's problem. And if the man you're thinking of doesn't have enough power, look to a man above him and make it his problem. So how do you do this? You agitate. So an example is you get a group you work with together with an airtight proposal for better flexible and paid leave policies. And even after HR tells you no, you don't give up and you bother the CEO so much, he wants to do it. So it's not a problem for him anymore. This is actually based on several true stories I found in my reporting. Or you get a group of friends together and email the head of the school board weekly until he puts funding for after-school programs on the school board agenda, just so you'll leave him alone. And you make your case to your town that you need an after-school program because, hello, as Patrice says, the workday does not end at 2:45. And maybe you can afford a babysitter or maybe you can't. But making this problem that you are feeling so acutely in your life a man's problem makes it so it can get better for everyone. And you do not rescue your husband when he has a call that's running long that will make him late for daycare pickup. He has to sweat the stress and he has to use his male privilege to agitate for better policies for parents in his workplace. So people see it's not just moms who have caregiving responsibilities. It is also a man's problem. And every time you make your life easier by making life harder for a man with power, you are advocating for systems change. So this is how we make things better for moms everywhere. So my moonshot is to make every problem mothers face more equally a man's problem.
I love it. And for those of you that don't follow Catherine, go right now, pull out your phones, pull up your Twitter and start following her. Backstage, a lot of us were talking about how her Twitter feed gives us life every day. Thank you for sharing those very important ways that we can actively improve in our everyday. And for the last one, I would love to share a little bit. I'm, as was mentioned, the founder and CEO of a company called Milo. We're looking at how do we tackle the invisible load of running and raising a family. This is what obsesses my mind, but it's also a problem that I live every day in raising two girls with my husband. My big, bold idea is that we come to treat invisible and unpaid work of our homes as distastefully as we do menial labor. Progress in human history has always been about seeing some kind of work and building the machines to make it faster, easier, better. But it's also a story about whose problems we deem worthy of seeing and creating solutions for. We have billions of dollars going into building the productivity tools for a narrow set of people at work. Zoom, Slack, Asana, this meeting software. Because people see the friction and the inefficiencies and value it to invest and experiment their way to something better. Well, we need that in our homes and for our brains. It's time to see and value the invisible work that fills my brain and interrupts my creative contributions to the world on an hourly basis. I want to live in a world where notifications for Crazy Hair Day automatically create an event and a reminder for that day. I want to live in a world where I can forward a birthday party invite and just have it magically become a thing on a calendar and with a reminder to buy a birthday present. But even yet, just send me 3 options and I can choose from one of those and they shows up all wrapped. I want to live in a world that sees my needing to find a Zoom link for school curriculum night with the same distaste as searching for it for a work meeting. I want all of us to start getting obsessive about the stuff that we think is beneath us so that we can innovate our way out of having to do it. So with that, hopefully that gives the audience just a taste of the deep work and a deep optimism for all of the different work happening across a range of different problems. Now, I would love if we had any questions, and I'm just going to go quickly through the chat. We had one question that said, for Catherine, is what do you do when it's women in power who aren't supporting it? That's a little trickier.
Okay, so women Women can also very much uphold patriarchal status quos. I like to call them the henchwomen of the patriarchy. So in my big moonshot example, henchwomen of the patriarchy can also be stand-ins for men. But in some ways, sometimes they can be even more bitter adversaries than men themselves, because they've had to maneuver through these systems. And if they feel like they've gotten out on top, they're interested in preserving these status quo. So I would say one thing that I would suggest is that often, proportionally, women do not hold power, and mothers certainly don't hold power. So oftentimes there are still men you can find with power that will make it their problem. But you can also, in this example, sub in a henchwoman of the patriarchy for a man.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to just sneak in with a couple of questions. Patrice, if I could, on people's behalf, are there current projects happening? Like, is this actually a thing? Like, you paint such a visceral, incredible picture. Is there experimentation? Is anybody trying this out? Are there places that we can point to as models?
Yeah, great question, Avni. I mean, I think this happens more at the private school level. There's been some interesting initiatives around charter schools that look at like more of a holistic family support, but it's not necessarily getting embraced at the public school city level. And there has been movement and energy around changing the school day, which I think is the most important piece. But obviously that comes with funding implications around how we support that experience, across a longer time period. But I think it's like also conceptually just thinking about the fact that we would deserve this as a solution. And how do we think about education and care being more integrated rather than education being more of a priority than caregiving, when rather they're actually both really central to our families being able to thrive. So I think it's exciting to see solutions starting to pop up, and how do we get this obviously into the mainstream system is the big push.
Well, what I love about what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, it's school as the mechanism, as the pillar, but it's really, we're building around community, around a concept of community, and that ebbs and flows, and that doesn't happen between just this hour and this hour. And actually, from a business perspective, there could be huge gains about, like, you talk about efficiencies, you talked about optimization and utilization. And so this isn't one message that I want people to get, that when we talk about social good, this isn't always the purvey of nonprofits or B Corp kind of companies. This can be very much down the middle of the types of organizations that we're building with profit in mind. So one other question, maybe I'll have it be like a really quick lightning round of each individual person. But one of the questions was, how can our community support these big ideas? And so thinking about your space and what you see, maybe if each person can just come up and say one thing that people can actively either sign up, go try out, go support. Patrice, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think what I love from this panel across the board is just like, how do we change our expectations? Like, that we actually deserve these solutions, like that we shouldn't be alone in this work, that we should be thinking about this as a collective experience where we're all a part of. And this is not on us to shoulder alone in dark corners in homes by ourselves, like not making it. So I think the first step is to even be in the position of saying, like, we deserve this, and let's actually start building it.
Love it. Brian.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing would be to get businesses to invest in the care of their parents, and not default to the mom carrying the load, but recognizing that many men in their employment can actually invest in their families if they're invested in by their bosses, and creating opportunities for men to have those flexible hours, for men to have a paid benefit that they can step away at the earliest days of a child's life and have that emotional connection built, so that by age 5, by age 6, that they're already encoding in their brains that I'm a caregiver too. I can show up, as we heard earlier, to the school board meetings, be on the PTA, and not just default that to the moms and to other caregivers.
Love it. Eve?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to Moms Rising, because we can all text paid leave 1 today to 747-464. So just text the term paid leave one, the number one, to 747-464. You'll be connected to your senator and just write to them, please, we want you to pass paid leave. We know you're working on it today.
Incredible. Alana.
So of course my husband called to ask what he should give my daughter for lunch while I was listening. So I assume the prompt is like, what can we do now?
What's one thing that the community can support or do on behalf to like support some of these big ideas?
Totally. I mean, so same here. Like there's nothing bigger right now than getting the care agenda and the soft infrastructure passed. I would say also that like one thing I've heard loud and clear from the Hill is that it's really powerful to have employer voices involved in this conversation. So everyone should do what you've just said. And also if you either are an employer, you're a founder, you're a CEO, if you work for a sort of progressively minded employer or in their HR seat and can get, there's a number of letters to sign and people can reach out to me as well and sort of ways to raise your voice as a corporation. Because I think that's really important. And also like husbands should just figure out what to serve their kids for lunch. It is not hard. Thank you.
That's a never-ending one. Kristen?
As other people have said, when this many people are having the same problems at the same time, we don't have an epidemic of personal failures. We have national structural solutions that we can and must solve together. And so the one thing we can do is embrace our power together. We are more powerful than we think. I've seen amazing wins happen because moms, dads, caregivers have raised their voices. So raise your voice. Share your story with your member of Congress. Text paid leave one to 747-464 right now, because many of these policies are moving forward to build a care infrastructure and on the line right now for transformational change in Washington, D.C. And of course, join Moms Rising. It's free. We're your one-stop shop to figuring out how to take action in the moments that matter, because we know you're busy. So we're doing the work and the homework to figure out when your voice can be a fulcrum point for change. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I love it. Thank you, Kristen. And that's such an incredible one that if everyone could do today and now. Catherine.
I would say find your people, whoever your people are, find your community and work together on whatever the issues are that are important to you. There's so many things. We've talked about some of them here. Some people are really fired up about national policy. Some people are fired up about their local schools. And sometimes you just need to focus on your own workplace or your own neighborhood. Whatever it is, find your people. And I think that's really a really important first step.
Love it. Thanks, Catherine. And I'll just close out to say, I echo what Patrice says, that we all need to demand more up and down every part of our experiences, but I'll also speak as a founder building products and companies. Demand and understand who's behind the products, especially when it comes to such human things as our families, and make sure that where your dollars are going actually support the types of products that are tied to your values as a family and what you need to see for your life. With that, thank you so much for joining us for our first Care Corner, where we shed a little bit of light on what's happening in the space of care and how we push all of these important ideas and work forward.